My son looked me in the eye and told me I was too old and too rough around the edges to attend the grand opening of the business I had just agreed to fund with $450,000 of my own money. Then he slid a contract across my kitchen table and asked me to sign it anyway. He even put his hand on my shoulder, the way you pat a dog before you leave for work, and said, "You should be proud, Dad. Your money is going to build something beautiful. You just won't be there to see it." I looked at him. I looked at the contract. And then I smiled, because I had just decided exactly what I was going to build instead. My name is Frank Calloway. I am 68 years old. I spent 39 years as a civil engineer designing bridges across this country. Not metaphorical bridges, real ones. Steel and concrete structures that carried hundreds of thousands of cars every single day over rivers, over canyons, over everything that would otherwise stop a person dead in their tracks. I understood load capacity better than most people understood their own bank accounts. I knew exactly how much weight a structure could bear before the cracks started to show. I knew this because I had learned it the hard way, standing on unfinished spans in the bitter wind, watching what happened when someone miscalculated. What I did not know, not until a gray Tuesday morning in October, was that I had spent 4 decades calculating load tolerances for steel beams while completely ignoring the weight my own son had been quietly placing on my back. It started with a phone call the previous spring. Tyler had been living in Denver for 3 years with his girlfriend, Vanessa. She was a wellness influencer, which as far as I could tell meant she took photographs of herself doing yoga in expensive locations and sold supplements with names like Luminous and Restore and Align to people who had money to spare and problems to solve. Tyler had left his engineering job 18 months earlier to help manage her brand, which in practice meant he drove her to events, maintained her website, and occasionally appeared in her posts, holding a smoothie and looking pleasantly vacant. When Tyler called that spring, his voice had the particular energy of someone who has convinced himself that an idea is already a success before it has been attempted. "Dad," he said, "we are doing it. We are opening the retreat center. Vanessa has the following. She has the brand. We just need the capital to make it physical." I asked him what that meant in numbers. He paused the way people pause when the number they are about to say embarrasses even them. $450,000, he said. To start. I did not say yes immediately. I told him I would look at the business plan. He sent it 3 days later. It was 40 pages of beautiful graphic design and very little substance. The projected revenue figures were built on assumptions that a first-year business student would have challenged. The location they had chosen, a property outside Aspen, Colorado, was priced at a premium that made no sense for a startup wellness operation. But Vanessa had done a video tour of the property with 800,000 views, and the comments were full of people saying they would absolutely book a retreat there. Tyler sent me that video as supplemental evidence. I had built bridges. I knew the difference between a load-bearing structure and a beautiful rendering. But Tyler was my son. He was the boy I had taken fishing every summer at my cabin in Montana, the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck on the drive back, his head against the window, his face still dirty from the lake. I looked at those fishing photos on my shelf and I said yes. I transferred the first installment of $150,000 and told him the remaining $300,000 would come in 2 disbursements, contingent on progress milestones. The summer passed. The renovation began. I followed along through the photos Tyler sent, through Vanessa's social media updates, through occasional brief phone calls that always ended with Tyler saying, "We are right on track. Dad, this is going to be incredible." I asked twice to visit the property during construction. Both times Tyler said the site was not ready for guests. The dust and the noise, he said, would not be the right impression. I accepted this. The invitation to the grand opening arrived in September, except it was not an invitation. It was a folder. A professionally printed, spiral-bound folder with Vanessa's logo embossed on the cover in rose gold. I opened it, expecting an event schedule. Instead, I found a new contract. The document requested the remaining $300,000 to be transferred in full by October 1st, 2 weeks away. It also included, tucked behind the financial pages like an afterthought that was actually the entire point, a deed transfer form for my Montana cabin. I read the cabin page 3 times. The cabin had been in my family for 31 years. My late wife Eleanor had picked out the curtains. My grandchildren had carved their names into the dock railing. It sat on 14 acres of lakefront property that was now, according to a market appraisal I had never commissioned but which was included in the folder, worth $1.2 million. The transfer form requested that I sign it over to the Callaway Retreat Foundation, a nonprofit Tyler and Vanessa had apparently established the previous month. Tucked behind the deed form was a handwritten note in Tyler's handwriting on a sheet of Vanessa's branded stationery. It said, "Dad, we want you to know this is all because of you. The cabin would be the perfect second location for the retreat, and putting it in the foundation keeps it in the family name. You always said you wanted to give back. This is how. We love you." I set the folder on the kitchen table. I walked to the window. Outside, the cottonwood trees along my fence line were turning gold, the way they did every October, the way they had been doing long before Tyler was born and would keep doing long after I was gone. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked back to the table, opened the folder again, and looked for the thing I had somehow missed on the first read. The thing that answered the question of where my invitation to the grand opening actually was. There was no invitation. There was a note at the bottom of the event schedule page, in small, italicized text, that read, "As discussed, we feel the opening night guest list should reflect the Luminary brand's target demographic. We so appreciate your foundational support and will absolutely have you out to the property once the energy of the launch has settled. You are the heart of this. You just won't be at the party. As discussed." We had never discussed this, not once. I called Tyler. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was expecting the call and had decided to take it rather than let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Dad." His voice was careful, the voice of a man walking across ice. "Did you get the folder?" "I got it," I said. "I am looking at it now. The opening is 3 weeks away. There is no invitation in here for me." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that. Look, Vanessa has worked really hard on the brand positioning. The retreat is about a certain lifestyle aesthetic. It is younger, it is aspirational, it is very visual. The opening is going to be fully documented. There is a film crew. 3 major wellness publications are covering it. And we just think, honestly, Dad, no offense, but you are a retired engineer from outside Cheyenne. The people who are coming are influencers and investors and journalists. You showing up in your Carhartt jacket talking about bridge construction, it just doesn't fit the story we are trying to tell." I sat down in my kitchen chair. The folder was open on the table in front of me. $450,000 in the cabin, I said. Tyler hesitated. The cabin would be incredible for the second location. Vanessa has already done a concept video, and the engagement is through the roof. Dad, this is a real opportunity for the family legacy. I want to understand something, Tyler. You want me to give you the rest of my money and the cabin that belonged to your mother, and in return I am not allowed to attend the event. He was quiet for a moment. It is not about permission. It is about fit. I know it sounds harsh, but this is business, Dad. You always told me, business is business. He was right. I had told him that. Many times, in many contexts. I had not anticipated the particular context in which he would choose to apply it. I said, "All right, let me think about it. Give me a few days." He sounded relieved, which meant he had expected more resistance. "Sure, of course, Dad. Take your time. Just remember the transfer deadline is October 1st, so we can clear everything before the opening." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the shelf. She was standing on the dock at the Montana cabin, laughing at something off camera, her hair pushed sideways by the wind. She had been gone for 6 years. Tyler had given the eulogy at her funeral and cried through most of it. I had believed, in that moment, that the grief was real. I still believed that. The grief had been real, but grief fades, and money is immediate, and Vanessa had a vision board that apparently included my dead wife's property. I picked up my phone, not to call Tyler, to call a man named Raymond Oakes, who had been my personal attorney for 22 years, And then I called a woman named Sandra Pruitt, who had been recommended to me 2 years earlier by a colleague whose daughter had gone through a particularly complicated divorce. Sandra ran an investigative consulting firm out of Denver. She was thorough, she was discreet, and she charged accordingly. I told her I needed a full financial and background picture on Vanessa Marsh and on the Callaway Retreat Foundation. I told her I needed it in 10 days. Raymond met me for coffee the next morning. He read through the folder with the careful attention of someone who has spent decades reading documents designed to look friendly while doing unfriendly things. He looked up at page 12, the deed transfer section, and he looked at me the way doctors look at patients whose test results they have already seen. "Frank," he said quietly, "this transfer form, if you sign it, has no reversal clause. The foundation is structured so that Vanessa controls the board. Tyler is listed as co-director, but Vanessa has 2 of the 3 board seats. She can dissolve the foundation and liquidate the assets with a simple board vote." He tapped the page. "Your cabin, your 14 acres of lakefront property, could be sold within 60 days of your signature without your knowledge or consent." I looked at the paper. I thought about Eleanor choosing the curtains. I thought about Tyler's name carved into the dock rail next to his sister's. His sister, who had moved to Portland 8 years ago, and who Tyler had not spoken to in 3 years over a disagreement about their mother's jewelry. What about the $150,000 I already transferred? Raymond shook his head. "That is in the foundation's operating account. It is spent or committed. You would need to file for fraudulent inducement to attempt recovery, and that is a long, expensive road with uncertain outcome." I nodded. I told Raymond to wait for Sandra's report before drafting anything. I told him to be ready to move fast when the time came. Sandra called me 9 days later. She asked if she could come to the house. I said yes. She arrived on a Wednesday evening with a laptop and a manner that was brisk in the way of someone who has learned that delivering bad news slowly only prolongs everyone's suffering. She opened her laptop on my kitchen table, the same table where the folder had been sitting, and she walked me through what she had found. Vanessa Marsh had filed for personal bankruptcy 4 years ago under her previous name. She had 2 civil judgments against her from former business partners in a supplement venture that collapsed in 2021. The supplements had been found to contain ingredients not listed on the label. The settlement agreements included non-disclosure provisions, which was why none of this appeared in a basic search. The Luminary brand and its 800,000 followers were real, but the income they generated was significantly lower than Vanessa represented in the business plan Tyler had sent me. Sandra had found 3 former collaborators who, speaking off the record, described a pattern of promising investors early access and elevated roles in exchange for capital, then repositioning those investors as passive backers once funds were secured. But the thing that made me set down my coffee cup and look out the window for a long moment was the audio Sandra played from a recording she had made at a rooftop restaurant in Denver where Vanessa had lunch with her business manager, a woman named Priya, 3 days after Tyler called me about the opening. The audio was clear. Vanessa's voice was easy to recognize. She said, "He is completely on board. He is one of those old guilt-trip dads, you know the type. He will write the check just to prove he is not bitter about being left out. It is almost too easy, and once we have the cabin, we do not need him for anything anymore. We flipped the cabin in 18 months, used the equity to fund the Scottsdale location, and by then Tyler will have figured out that his dad is not part of the brand story. He knows it too. He just hasn't admitted it to himself yet." Priya said something I couldn't quite hear. Vanessa laughed. "Tyler is fine. He does what I tell him. He wants to make me happy." She paused. "The cabin alone is worth more than everything else his father is giving us combined. That is the real investment. The rest is just the price of getting the deed." Sandra stopped the recording. She closed the laptop. "I appreciate that this is difficult to hear," she said. I told her it was not difficult to hear. I told her difficult was watching a falsework give way on a bridge in the rain when I was 34 years old, before anyone was on it, thank God. This was not difficult. This was just information, and information was something I knew exactly what to do with. I called Tyler that evening. I made my voice soft. I made it sound like a man who had been sitting alone in a quiet house thinking about his age and his mortality and his deep desire not to be estranged from his only son. "Tyler," I said, "I have been thinking about everything. You are right. I need to be supportive. I need to stop making this about me." He responded the way people respond when they hear exactly what they were hoping to hear. He sounded warm and relieved and slightly too eager. "Dad, that means so much. You are not going to regret this. The retreat is going to be something you can be proud of for the rest of your life." I told him I wanted to sign the documents in person, that it felt right to do it together. I told him I would drive to Denver the following weekend, take him to dinner, and we could handle the paperwork there. He said, of course, absolutely, and suggested a steakhouse downtown that had a 3-week reservation wait. When I said I would take care of the reservation, he did not protest. Before I drove to Denver, I had 3 conversations that Tyler knew nothing about. The first was with Raymond, who drafted a specific set of counter documents. The second was with Sandra, who made 3 copies of the audio recording and delivered them to 3 specific recipients I had identified. The third was with a man at the county recorder's office who confirmed the exact processing time for a competing deed transfer I had already prepared, placing the Montana cabin in an irrevocable conservation trust in Eleanor's name, with the local Land Preservation Society as the designated steward. That transfer was filed Tuesday morning. The cabin was no longer mine to give because I had already given it to the mountains and to Eleanor's memory and to every bird that had ever landed on that dock. The dinner was at the steakhouse on Friday evening. Tyler was there when I arrived, wearing a blazer that I recognized as new. Vanessa was beside him, radiant in a way that was very carefully constructed, and a man named Davis, her business manager, who smiled the smile of someone who expects to leave a meeting considerably richer than when they arrived. They ordered freely, as I had told Tyler to do. I ordered a modest cut and a glass of water and let them talk. Vanessa talked about the opening. She talked about the film crew and the publications and the celebrity chef who was doing the catering. She talked about the cabin as though it already belonged to her, referencing the renovation plans with a specificity that told me she had been thinking about it for months. She called it the Montana property, not the cabin, the Montana property. Halfway through the main course, Davis placed the documents on the table. Very organized, tabbed for signatures, a pen laid across the top. He explained each page with the efficiency of a man who has done this many times. Tyler watched me with eyes that wanted very badly to look casual. Vanessa cut her steak and did not look at me at all. When Davis finished, I nodded slowly. I picked up the pen. I turned to Tyler and I said, "Before I sign, I want to ask you something, just between us." Tyler said, "Of course, Dad." I said, "Is this what you actually want? Because I want you to look at me and tell me that this is your decision, that you want me to fund this with the cabin and the money and stay home from the opening, that you looked at all of it and decided this is right." He looked at Vanessa for just a fraction of a second before he looked back at me. The fraction of a second was all I needed to see. "Dad," he said, "we have been over this. It is business. You understand business." I set the pen down. I reached into my jacket and placed a different document on the table. Raymond had prepared it to look similar to their paperwork, so it took Davis a moment to register that it was not what he expected. I said, "I need you to look at this first." Tyler frowned. He picked it up. I watched his eyes move across the first page, and I watched his face change the way a bridge changes when a critical joint fails. Gradually, then all at once. "What is this?" he said. His voice was flat. "That is the Conservation Trust filing for the cabin," I said. "It was recorded at the county office on Tuesday morning. The cabin is no longer a transferable asset. It belongs to the Eleanor Callaway Land Preservation Trust, permanently." Vanessa set down her fork. She looked at Davis. Davis was reading the document with the focused attention of a man recalculating every number in his head. "The Montana property is not available," I said, in case any part of that was unclear. Tyler stood up halfway, then sat back down. "Dad," he said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there all evening. Something younger. Something that sounded like the boy who used to ask me what happens when a bridge breaks. "Dad, I don't understand. We had an agreement. We had a conversation," I said. I never signed anything. And there is something else, Tyler. I want you to listen carefully because I am only going to say this once. I placed Sandra's summary on the table, not the audio. Just the summary, which was 4 pages and included the bankruptcy record, the civil judgments, the pattern of investor engagements, and a transcript excerpt from the restaurant recording. I placed it so that Tyler could read it and Vanessa could see that I had it. Vanessa saw it. She understood what it was before Tyler finished the first page. I watched her assess the situation with the speed of someone who has had to assess exits before. She reached for Davis's arm and said something quiet to him that I was not meant to hear but did. "We need to talk outside." I said, "Vanessa, I would prefer you stay. Tyler deserves to hear this with you present." She looked at me then. It was the first time all evening she had looked at me directly. Her expression cycled through several things quickly. Calculation, anger, something that might have been respect, and then a careful blankness. She stayed. Tyler read the document. He read it slowly. When he got to the transcript excerpt, he stopped. He put the paper flat on the table with both hands as though steadying himself. He did not look at Vanessa. He looked at the middle distance above the breadbasket. I said, "Tyler, I am not here to destroy what you are building. The retreat center may be a legitimate business with good prospects, but it was funded with my money under conditions that were misrepresented to me, and it was designed to ultimately acquire your mother's property through a structure that would have removed it from our family permanently. I cannot be a part of that, and I will not pretend I did not find out," Tyler said, very quietly. "How long have you known?" I said. "Long enough?" He nodded. He was still looking at the breadbasket. Vanessa said, her voice even. "Frank, I think there has been a misunderstanding about how the foundation structure was communicated." Raymond had anticipated this word. Misunderstanding. He had told me it would be the first word they used. I said, "Raymond Oakes is my attorney. Any further conversation about the foundation structure should go through him. His contact information is on the back of the summary." Davis closed his folder. He looked at Vanessa in a way that told me he was already adjusting his commission expectations downward. I picked up my dinner knife and finished the last of my steak. I was not in a hurry. The food was good. The room was warm. Outside the restaurant windows, Denver was going about its Friday evening, indifferent to the particular conversation happening at our table, which suited me fine. I paid the bill. I included a generous tip for our server, who had been professional and cheerful throughout and deserved to go home with something good from this evening. I buttoned my coat. I stood up. "Tyler," I said, "I love you. I have loved you your entire life, and I will love you when this evening is a distant memory. But I will not fund a project that was built on a false foundation. The $150,000 is gone, and I have accepted that. The remaining $300,000 is not coming. The cabin is protected. And if you and Vanessa choose to renegotiate the terms of the retreat's financing honestly and transparently, Raymond's door is open." I paused. There was one more thing. Something I had been deciding whether to say for the past 3 days. I said it. "I also want you to know that I have already spoken to your sister. I called her last week. We talked for 2 hours. We are going to have Thanksgiving at the cabin this year. You are invited. Both of you. That is an open invitation with no conditions attached, and it has nothing to do with money." Tyler looked up at me then. Something moved across his face that I could not fully name. It was not quite guilt, and it was not quite grief. It was something older than both. I said goodnight, and I walked out. The valet brought my truck. It was a 10-year-old Ford, the same kind I had been driving for most of my adult life, sensible and reliable, and currently worth approximately $12,000, which made it by far the least expensive vehicle in the queue. I tipped the young man, got in, and drove out onto the street. I did not drive home immediately. I drove to a park along the South Platte River that I had passed hundreds of times in the years I worked on projects in Denver and never once stopped at. I parked and I got out and I walked down to the water. The river was low at that time of year, moving slowly over the rocks with a sound that had nothing to do with anything that had happened that evening. I stood there for a while. The air smelled of cottonwood and cold water. I had spent my career building things that were meant to last, things designed to carry weight far beyond their original specifications, because in engineering, You build in a margin. You do not build for the load you expect. You build for the load you cannot predict. I had not applied that principle to fatherhood. I had built Tyler's life without a margin for failure. I had made it so comfortable and so safe that he had never learned what it felt like when a structure was genuinely compromised. He had never had to stand on a failing span and figure out where the load was going. That was on me. I could see it clearly now, standing at the river. Not all of it, but enough. I drove home. The house was quiet. Eleanor's photograph was on the shelf where it always was. I sat in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular, just sitting in the quiet of a house where I had made a large number of decisions, some good and some not. 2 weeks later, the Luminary Wellness Retreat had its grand opening. I watched a short clip of it on my phone, posted by one of the publications that covered it. The property was beautiful. The orchards in the background were turning with the season. Vanessa stood in the center of the frame looking exactly the way she had planned to look. Tyler was there, slightly to her left, holding a glass of something and smiling in the careful way of a man who is thinking about several things at once. I did not feel what I expected to feel watching it. I had expected bitterness, or vindication, or some clean emotion with clear edges. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. Not the crushing kind, but the thin and ordinary kind that accompanies the recognition that things are as they are and not as you wished they would be. Raymond called me the following Monday. He informed me that Vanessa's legal team had made preliminary inquiries about the Conservation Trust, looking for procedural vulnerabilities. He told me the filing was airtight. I thanked him and told him to bill me. Sandra called the week after that to let me know she had confirmed the audio recordings had reached the 3 recipients I had designated. The 2 wellness publications that were planning feature profiles on Vanessa's brand and a podcast that had booked her for January. She told me the features had been quietly shelved and the podcast booking had been canceled without explanation. She said, in her dry, professional way, that the retreat would need to find its footing on its actual merits now. I told her that was as it should be. My daughter flew in from Portland the week before Thanksgiving. We drove up to Montana together, 12 hours with 2 coffee stops and a diner lunch in a small town in Idaho where the pie was remarkable. And we talked about her mother for the first time in a long time without either of us crying, which felt like progress. The cabin was exactly as I had left it. The dock rail still had the names carved into it. The curtains Eleanor had picked out were still hanging in the kitchen window, a little faded now, letting in the thin November light. We built a fire and sat by it, and my daughter told me about her life in Portland in a way she had not before, openly and at length, and I listened. Tyler called on the morning of Thanksgiving. He did not call Vanessa's phone. He called mine, directly, which was something he had not done in months. When I answered, he said, "Dad," just that word, just my name for him. I said, "Tyler." He said, "I am sorry." And then he was quiet for a long time in the way of someone who has more to say but is determining whether he is brave enough to say it. I waited. The fire was going. My daughter was asleep on the couch with the dog we had borrowed from the neighbors. Outside the lake was flat and gray under a low white sky. He said, "She told me you were part of the brand problem, that the story only worked if you were not in it." I knew it was wrong and I went along with it anyway. I told myself it was business. But it was not business. It was something else, and I knew what it was, and I did it anyway. I said, "I know." He said, "The retreat is in trouble. The features fell through. 2 of the sponsors pulled back. Vanessa says it is temporary, but I've been looking at the numbers myself and I don't think it is temporary." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I do not know yet, but I am going to figure it out myself this time." I thought about what to say. I thought about the bridge in the rain when I was 34, the false work giving way before anyone was on it. I thought about standing there in the mud looking at what had failed and understanding precisely why it had failed and knowing that the only thing to do was go back to the calculations and start again, correctly this time, without the shortcuts. I said, "There is pie here if you want to come. It is a long drive." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Yeah?" I said, "It is a long drive, but the road is clear." He said he would think about it. He said he would call me back. He did not call back that day, But 3 days later, he showed up at the cabin door at dusk with a duffel bag and the look of someone who had been driving for a long time and thinking for even longer. I let him in. My daughter made room on the couch. The fire needed tending, and I told him where the woodpile was. He went and got the wood. He came back and he stacked it the way I had taught him years ago, and the fire caught and the room was warm. We sat there, the three of us, for a long time without talking much, which was its own kind of conversation. I had built bridges for 39 years. Some of them were still standing. Some of them had been replaced by better structures. A few had been dismantled when the need for them had passed. I had learned that what matters in engineering is not that a structure stand forever, but that it carry what it is meant to carry for as long as it is needed, and then yield gracefully when something stronger and truer is ready to take its place. I was 68 years old. I had given my son everything I had, including the things I should have withheld and the things that only hurt him in the having. I could not undo any of that. But I could sit by this fire in this cabin in the mountains that belonged now to the land and to Eleanor's memory, and I could let my children back in without a price attached, and I could let the rest be what it was going to be. The lake was dark outside the window. The mountains held the snow that would be there until spring. The names on the dock rail would be there longer than that, longer than any of us. That was enough. That was, finally, enough.